Hello, and welcome to our discussion of Topic 2 in MSAI 631. As a refresher, this course deals with human-computer interaction, looking at it through the lens of artificial intelligence, where that computer that you're interacting with as a human likely has some form of AI involved. So we'll be talking a little bit this week about, and this time, about using a literature review as a way to learn a new topic. And this is something not necessarily specific to this course, but something that's quite valuable that you may want to consider, especially if you continue your education towards a doctorate or even as part of your career. I found it to be quite useful. The methodology that I use is not a bad approach. Also, we'll talk a little bit about the multimodal sort of experience inside of HCI, of why context is important and why you should care. And then in a later discussion, we'll talk about setting up development environments and the various approaches that can be appropriate for this course. So, literature reviews, what are they and why should you care? And why is it a good way to learn something that you don't know much about? So to start, what's a literature review, right? That's an important element of this. And it's a collection of, or it's an article that's written about a collection of documents. And it's basically where individuals, researchers, have identified some domain that is of interest to them. And then they've spent a fair amount of time finding articles related to that topic and then essentially writing a summary of sorts about what the contribution of each one of those documents, each one of those articles, what it contributes to the body of knowledge related to that domain. And generally speaking, they're thoughtfully constructed and basically to ensure that it's a fair and complete coverage of the topic. That means that there's a methodology that's involved with their selection. It's a bit more advanced than just simply going to your favorite academic search engine and typing in a phrase and hitting enter. Generally speaking, you keep track of the various search terms that were utilized, the systems that were used to find those papers, and various other things, as well as potentially returning the metrics. How many articles match certain keywords, that sort of thing. It also, an important part of what a literature review brings is that there are a lot of references to relevant documents, as well as a head start on what those articles are about. So they can serve as a starting point for your own research. Now, understand that as a scholar writing a scholarly work, you can't just read a literature review and then cite that review as the source of the elements that are essentially summarizations of those works. That's secondary citation, a technical term for that sort of behavior. Not something that is good. It's something you should avoid. So in general, though, it's a great way of getting a good start. So how do you go about doing it? Well, to find literature reviews, you want to include the word literature review sometimes in your search. And there's also inside of Google Scholar now, this nice little section here that says review articles as the type that you're interested in. Guess what that is? That's essentially literature review articles. So they're important enough that they have their own sort of filtering criteria, right? So pretty cool stuff, right? So an example of your search phrase might be literature review, multimodal human-computer interaction. And you can see that we've came back with something that even in the very first hit ends with a systematic literature review. That systematic is the key word there. It means that someone had a methodology that they followed to do their literature review on a given topic. In this case, how Internet of Things and augmented reality benefits from multimodal interactions, right? So any pretty interesting sort of topics. So the way that you typically would do this is not that different than you do evaluating any sort of a scholarly work. You start with, where is it published at? That's the key thing. Just because it's somehow accessible to you through a search engine doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good article and that you should be really using it as even a starting point for your knowledge. You do want to make sure that it has been peer reviewed. That means that multiple people have looked at that article, right? So there's a process to get an article published in a peer reviewed publication. It starts with a submission of your article, and then it's sent out to experts in that field for their review. They take a look at it. They make notes on it. They identify areas that potentially need some improvement. And then your publication is contingent upon addressing those issues, those concerns. And then you might find those in a conference proceeding, but conference proceedings are always on the edge of, are they really scholarly or not? It depends upon, to some extent, the proceeding. But journals, always a safe bet. And then from that level down, you would probably go to books next, even over peer-reviewed or over conference proceedings. So there's a hierarchy, if you will, of scholarly sources, and not all sources are equal. When you're looking at one of these articles, take a look and just really step back and look at it. Does it have any typos? Were there spelling mistakes? Is there any sort of grammatical things that just jump out at you? It's not that those things unto themselves are a surefire indication that the article is not good, but more likely than not, it's an indication that the peer review was not all that exhaustive. If the people doing the review didn't say, fix your typos, then that's kind of concerning, right? Now, that being said, there are times as a peer review participant, you may not really be focusing on the mechanical issues such as grammar and spelling and typos and that sort of thing. But that being said, if I'm looking at an article like that, I will always call it out, just because it detracts. It interferes with the ability of the reader to continue with the flow. So it's a very disruptive thing. So it should be addressed. Whenever you're looking at these peer-reviewed scholarly literature reviews, you want to use something like EndNote or Zotero to keep track of them. Those are reference keeping and source tools that help you. So they not only do things like help you with APA citation, as an example of keeping your references and your citations in sync and in the right format and all that other stuff, but they also allow you to attach a PDF to the record, serving as essentially your own personal library. So you can then make notes as well about that article. You can even potentially highlight the article or make annotations on it as a way of making it easier for you to find things later on. And then you may even want to rate it. So there's a number of stars that you can assign to the article as a way of saying, this is really, really good, or don't bother, right? So you could develop your own sort of approach when you're looking at the choice between EndNote and Zotero. EndNote is a superior product in my opinion, but it's not cheap. Zotero is free, and free is very compelling, especially as a starving college student. Do make notes as you're doing you're looking for these articles. You'll see inside of them, there's generally a place where they tell you what keywords that should be used essentially to index the paper. This is kind of a predecessor to our full text indexing and searching that we have available to us today. but it is still quite useful and compelling because it tells you what the authors felt were the appropriate phrases to uniquely identify their work. So you'll make a note of those, and you may want to use them for your own searches. And so that you'll know the search terms, the keywords, and so on. You may even want to use something like OneNote or some other technology as a way of keeping essentially a research notebook, so that you can keep track of, as you are essentially doing your own literature review, how did you go about doing it? What were useful terms? What is the real name of a thing? You'll find sometimes that is the hardest part of doing research, is there are sometimes challenges of being able to determine what something really is. What does it mean? And what is the right word to define something? Moving on to multimodal sort of technologies and that sort of thing inside of human-computer interaction. First of all, what is it? A fair question for any topic. And it's a way of interacting across different human senses in a simple word. So you're basically interacting with vision, hearing, touch, and so on. There may be some associations with virtual reality, so that you may have augmented reality or haptics, where you're having vibrations and feedback and so on. But more importantly, it's about you as a user of this technology are being impacted and touched, not just visually by reading the words, but you may be feeling vibrations. You could even be smelling something. You definitely would be hearing something. So there's lots of sort of multiple sensory channels that are being involved. It also applies to coming in across different contexts and in different situations. If I'm interacting with my personal assistant, I expect it to know that if I'm in my car talking to it and tell it to adjust the temperature, I mean at home, not in the car. So it knows me. It knows that I have a thermometer in the hall or wherever, a thermostat in the hall. And so that it can make sense of my interactions with it across computers, essentially, or across sessions or interactions. So also, generally speaking, whenever you're talking to your personal assistant, it knows who you are, in part because you've likely agreed to do the voice recognition. So it's going to know you from others, although sometimes there are challenges in a household of people that sound alike. But still, it is attempting to differentiate to know who you are, so that it establishes greater context. And when you're dealing with human-computer interaction, context is essential. So it's all about multiple input and output channels. Traditional input is things like a mouse, a keyboard, a touch screen, and so on. Traditional output is a screen, speakers, and so on. There are other technologies, though. Facial recognition is a way of identifying not just potentially who you are, but how old you are, what sort of mood you're in, and so on. Also, posture detection, of being able to, by examining how you're moving as you're exiting the workplace at the end of the day, how your day went from an employee morale perspective, and so on. So there's lots of uses of even taking traditional cameras and whatnot and applying more artificial intelligence sort of concepts to them to increase the type of value that we can extract. Vibration is an important place for feedback, very common in games, also common of late in things like your automobile. There are many vehicles that have vibrations in the seat and whatever else, such that if you're close to something on one side of the car or the other, that side of your seat vibrates, and so on. We also have IoT devices of various sorts that are being used to gather information and various forms of various channels of information flowing. thermostats, doorbells, and so on. It goes on and on. Why bother? What's the point? Why do it? And it's all about making that interaction, that experience that you're having with the system that you're interacting with, as good as possible. And so the more channels that are involved, the better the experience. Um, it's any more expected. You expect to be able to chat with a bot on a website and then pick up a phone, or even have based upon what you've said, the bot tells the system that does the telephony work to call you and connects you with an agent, right? We expect not just that, but then that agent should also know what you've told the bot previously. So we expect continuity of these experiences, so that it's not just a short atomic interaction. Think of it as a session in the sense of a web session that goes on and on and on. We expect that. And more importantly, you really want the agent to know what you're trying to get done. Otherwise, you have to go through that whole cycle of telling the person the same thing that you just told the system. So we do expect continuity, to the point that we become annoyed when it's not there. It's been a shift to where we expect intelligence as well. So think about it. Look for it in your everyday life. You'll find it there more than you think. It's become not just something that can be done, but something that we expect. And with that, if you have any questions, do let me know. I'm here to help. Stay engaged, and let me know how you're doing in the course. I'll talk with you later. Stay safe.